coming out now about neuroplasticity, the fact that we're not stuck with the brain we're born with. This makes the West very excited because we're now dealing with the brain. But it's basically the same finding the Buddha's had for 2,500 years, that you're not stuck with the mind you're born with. You can change it. Except he doesn't talk about the brain, that's all. But there's some really great, wonderful books bringing these two models together, you know, which I think is excellent. But I'm sticking to the Buddhist one here, using the Buddhist approach. So the crucial point for the Buddhists is we have to learn to become intimately familiar with our actual own thoughts. So when we go to a therapist in our culture, which is great, we need someone to help us. What we do is we talk about our feelings. We get angry, you know, we get jealous, we get depressed, whatever we say, we give those names. And then because we all believe utterly, and I use that word here very consciously, believe that these states of mind have their source in my past life, in events in my past life. So I can see in my relationship with Panos, let's say I get jealous easily. I don't believe he really loves me. I get very depressed. I mean, we all know these unbelievably deeply familiar with these parts of ourselves. But we just utterly assume, and it is in fact also the assumption of the materialist models of the mind, that we are the product of our external events. They are the main cause of who we are. This is such a given that it's almost hard to even hear it because we so assume it's the truth. You know, whenever you read the paper, and I read my different, you know, my newspapers on my iPad, and you read about the latest terrorist, the latest criminal, the latest murderer, whatever, and there's always this analysis about them and what happened in the past, their childhood, what their parents were like. This is naturally the first place we look for the source of our problems. I think it's so natural that we even as I say it, it's sort of puzzling that I should even point it out, because we so take it as the truth. Even you just say, how are you today? You know, Neil's point. Oh, I'm really freaking out today. Why? And then you give all the bad things that happen out there. The weather's bad. The traffic was terrible. The husband was mean. Immediately we say that. And in other words, we absolutely believe, default, the source of our pain, and indeed the source of our happiness, is out there. So we can spend, again, I keep saying this, the rest of our 2 days, how many days have we got left? 3, 2, on just this topic. Because understanding this point really indicates the key focus of actual Buddhist practice, being very technical about it. It's fine to look at the events. It's fine. I can tell you, my therapist, about what Panos said. What he did. He didn't come home. He looks at other girls. It's nothing wrong with telling you about what Panos did. But I'm not telling you the main problem. We're not discussing the main problem. That's Panos's problem. This is so shocking to our minds to get this point. When we can begin to get this, and again I keep saying Buddha does not own this. This is common sense. Then we can make the changes. And what are we looking at? Well, what are the names of the painful states of mind? They're called jealousy. They're called attachment. They're called anger. There's just 3. Even just attachment and anger is enough to look at and to become familiar with in your mind to the enormous depth to help you completely change yourself. And I'm not joking here. And I'm not mentioning the word meditation here. I'm not saying something the mystical called meditation does it for you. No, there's such a misconception about that. You can do this on the bloody toilet. You can do it walking, at the kitchen, because your mind is working all the time. We know this from the second we wake up until the second we go to sleep. If we counted the number of thoughts we'd have, we would lose numbers. We'd be lost. Even in the Western view, we have thousands of thoughts a second. But like I'm saying, 99% of them are just underneath, like this roar, quiet roar, constantly going. And we only pay attention to the very grossest level, not even of our thoughts. We're mainly paying attention to the external. I'm mainly paying attention to Panos. I'm mainly paying attention to what he says and what he's doing. I'm not even paying attention to my own thoughts. I happen to know that when I hear his words, some pain arises inside me. We've got to start looking in, not out. And don't think this is cosmic. Oh, looking inward. Sounds so mysterious to us. It's not. It's practical. But this is what we find so hard. We're not trained in this in our culture. It's really simple. That we're not trained in it. It's like a revelation to even hear the words. Because all Buddha's saying is, Robina, honey, Paros might be a creep, but he's not your problem. He's not your main problem. Your main problem is your jealousy. Your main problem is your anger. Your main problem is your attachment. This is a literal truth. This is a literal truth, not some kind of accusation, not some kind of moralistic statement. It's a technical, literal truth for the Buddha. So we have to, if we choose to, we can learn to discover if that's so. That's why I like to use extreme examples of people who maybe are doing this job. We know lots of people, and they never call themselves Buddhist, Christian, or anything else, that has got this capacity to know that they can't make the outside different, but they can change their attitude towards it. And a simple way of saying what I'm saying is you change your attitude towards Paros. Jealousy is an attitude. Attachment is an attitude. It's a viewpoint. It's an opinion. But the trouble for us is it comes along with this roaring, painful feelings. So they are what dominate us. We don't even notice that those feelings are coming from a series of misconceptions in our own mind. That these thoughts, these feelings themselves, jealousy, anger, are rooted in being conceptual stories. That's why we have to go deeper in, beneath the feelings, beyond the physical. Don't hear it as mystical. And that's why you've got to have some concentration. Otherwise, it's not possible. I don't know if I forget, I tell everybody the story, but did I mention the story about the woman on death row? I didn't, did I? No, I didn't, okay. Well, it's good to use extreme examples. For me, I find it so powerful. 30 years ago, 20 or 30 years ago, this story, I remember reading about this woman in Florida who'd been arrested with her husband for killing 2 policemen. They were in fact innocent. She got out after 17 years. So you can't imagine the nightmare. If you even think our own lives. What's happened? Not on? Okay. You even think our lives, when someone accuses us of doing something we didn't do. I mean, it could be like hell on earth. We might never get over it. People go crazy. So desperate to get the person to see that what they're saying is not true. Well, these 2 people were innocent, okay? He even got executed. The husband even got executed. Can you imagine the nightmare? The absolute torture for this woman. And she, at some point, I think she did yoga and things. And I think she wasn't a Buddhist or anything. But she did some kind of things in prison to help her. And she said, this is the point, she said, at some point, I realized I couldn't change anything. But they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided, I'm not a prisoner, I'm a monk. I'm not in a cell, I'm in a cave. That's it. Such cute words. So when we read it, we are very moved. But beginning to even go into that, the nightmare of that, you can't conceive. Now, at the same time, I read about a guy, also on death row, also innocent, who, in our terms, was normal. He went crazy. Now, we call that normal. And because we have this absolute addiction, this belief, I would say belief, that the reason he went crazy because he was innocent and he was wrongly accused, he's on death row. So he would scream daily as long as he had a voice. I did not rape and kill that woman, whatever. Now, those 2 situations we can see, the same scenario, someone accusing you of murder that you didn't do, and 2 completely different responses. Now, if we are really being scientific, which we think we are, and we really believe in modern psychology, and when I keep saying comparing, I'm not trying to be sort of like fundamentalist or like Tom Cruise who keeps criticising psychiatry. I'm not trying to be that way. All I'm doing is taking different viewpoints and comparing them, you know. So our view, instinctively, and indeed what is expressed in our modern psychology and indeed in science, is that the main cause of this, that it's natural that he got angry. It's natural he went crazy. So if a therapist met him for the first time and didn't know why he was crazy, within 5 minutes she would establish the reasons and she would write her report and say it's completely understandable. He's gone out of his mind because he's wrongly accused because he didn't murder anybody. We would take it for granted. So then you look at the woman, and we should be completely thrown out. We should be, because if it really is logically the actual cause, we have to say, well, what is it? How come she's not crazy then? I mean, she must be mad. Maybe she doesn't realise she's being wrongly accused. So maybe she's living in fantasy land, thinking she's not a monk, she's of this and she's of that. She must be nuts, you know, almost. But the point that Buddha's making is proved by this. That's all it is. This is not, again, not religion. Buddha doesn't own this. We do this every day ourselves. We can see sometimes that you can't make that thing go away. You can't change that red light. You can't make the light go green. You want it to be green, but you can't make it go green. You know that. So you either get annoyed and angry and want to shout and throw things at the red light, or you say, shut up, Robina, give it a break. It'll be green in a minute, and relax your mind. You just did the point. You just did what Buddha says. You change your mind. We do it every day. He runs with this technique to the nth degree. This is the basis of his entire philosophy. In terms of karma, which is another extension of Buddha's view about the mind, that explains even more why even in the first place things happen. That's another discussion, but it's all part of it. But the first one, the most fundamental one, the one that, you know, and I don't even care if you think your mind's your brain. I don't care if you think your mind isn't your brain. I don't care. We know we can change our thoughts. We know we can change the way we interpret something. That's the essence of it. That's what that woman did. So look at the courage and the point. So why it's so hard. It sounds easy, change your thoughts. Oh, I can do that. Yeah. But why it's so hard is because of the energy of these unhappy states of mind that are like junkies and addicts and concrete set in stone, and they're so habitual and so ancient and so painful that if you were to go to that guy very kindly and say, well, you know, I've got some techniques here, you could try to be less angry because anger is just an opinion about these people, and you could try to change that. People would think you're insane because he's normal. We'd say he's normal. So naturally, if I tell you that Panos punched me up this morning, you know, you'd understand why I'm suffering. You know, you'd understand that. You wouldn't, and it's not being, again, not being punitive. It's not as if, well, it's your own fault, Robina, and once you change your mind. No. It's just that showing our habits, it's as if we don't believe we can change our mind. We launch into and swim and drown in our old habits. And it's because they're habits, and because they're so painful, and when they're in the midst of those stories, you believe it totally. This whole idea from the Buddhist view, which we'll discuss, the deeper level in our mind, the deeper suffering, is it's sort of bad enough, as Lama Zopa says, that we fall into the trap of these unhappy emotions because they're habits. But the worst thing is, because there are actually they're elaborate stories about Panos, about the prison or whatever, they're stories. The trouble is we believe they're true, and that's where it's so hard. Because you could argue, let's say I'm jealous of Panos, and he comes home and I accuse him of looking at that girl. And he tells the truth and he says he didn't. Well, you'd think I'd go, oh, really, Pano, you didn't? Oh, what a relief. Phew. Hi, darling, how are you? We don't do that, do we? You completely believe you're right. So this is where it's impossible to judge whether you're right or wrong. We can't tell what's true. We don't know. We go mad. We go crazy. At the same time, you can have a husband who is cheating like crazy on you, and you believe every word he says because you're so attached. You can't see the truth. Everybody else knows he's cheating except you. So the one point the Buddha's making, these unhappy emotions have the characteristic of being unhappy. They're deeply disturbing, but they're also liars, and that's the part that's hard to see. So one of the words in Buddhist psychology for these unhappy states of mind is called delusion. Literally, they're delusions. You are delusional when you're fully attached, really angry, really attached, really jealous. You know, that's a shocking thing, because we say, you know, especially in English, the word's really good in English language. In other languages, it's not so clear. But in English, it's a word we really get. You're so delusional, Robina. You'd be really offended, because you know that someone's accusing you of not being in touch with reality. Well, that's exactly bullseye what Buddha's saying.
In Hebrew, we say you live in a movie.
Pardon?
In Hebrew, we say to someone not delusional, we say you live in a movie.
Well, that's only been the last 50 years you've said that, isn't it? 100 years. There were no movies 100 years before that.
That's the same?
Yeah, but so when are you living in a movie? What are you referring to? What situation?
That you
so give me a
script. You have your own script on something.
All right.
And you just had to change the script. That's it.
Who does? What are you talking about? So you're just repeating what I'm saying, basically?
Yes.
So you need to, do you? I need to hear it, do I? You sure I don't quite get it?
I need it.
Oh, well, then you say it to yourself then. So, okay. So then that means, so the two things we're saying, one is, three things. One is, these thoughts do not come from the person who said the thing to you. They don't come from your mother, and they're not a function of your brain. Two, these disturbing emotions. Two, these disturbing emotions are rooted in being conceptual stories. And three, because of that, we can change them. So four, the only way to change them is to become familiar with them, and that's why you have to have concentration. It's a logical, psychological process. That's the real job of being a Buddhist. All the other things you see, and sometimes when people get in Tibetan Buddhism, it seems overwhelming. Like all these endless things of altars and things and water bowls and offerings and this and prostrations and Buddhist monks and nuns and bald heads and God knows what. It just looks like totally more religious than than the Greek Orthodox or the Catholic, with all the rituals and things. And it's utterly confusing when we hear words like this and then look at the external of a Tibetan Buddhist place. You can't see the connection. It doesn't seem to be a connection. But this is the heart of it. And in fact, the only reason if a person takes on board the Tibetan Buddhist things, which is what I've done, you choose these different techniques, and when you understand their function, their only function is to help you. The reason you do them is that they help you do the actual job of changing your mind. The key thing is take away all that stuff, strip it away, and it comes down to the actual purpose. Like, where are you again? Who asked me yesterday, what's Buddhism? What's your name again?
Annika.
Annika, that's right. How do you spell it?
A-N-N-I-K-A.
Okay. So Annika's question, what's Buddhism in a sentence, you know? Well, being your own therapist. Looking at your mind, hearing the thoughts, knowing they're yours, recognizing their conceptual stories, seeing, and this is the point again, now according to Buddhist psychology, recognizing how they're invalid conceptual stories, they're deluded conceptual stories, they're not based in truth, and arguing with them. Like she said, what next? You know, you do this, you see them, and then what next? You argue with them. One approach is you argue with them. So how would be the analysis for me in this situation? Living with a boyfriend, I'm jealous. So let's just analyze what would be the inner therapy I'd do for myself. How would I argue with these? So let's say I'm seriously a Buddhist, taking on board Buddha's views, taking on board Buddha's view of karma, taking on board Buddha's view about the mind. I've chosen to use this as my, as I keep saying it, my working hypothesis, my way of describing the universe. This is my choice. So how would I do my inner analysis? Okay, I notice the jealousy. So let's say before he gets home, and I don't want to vomit it out all over him because I don't want to cause problems. I want to work on my own mind. So jealousy is the one that seems most prevalent. I'm freaking out, convinced he's looking at someone else, convinced he's late because he's with somebody else, whatever the stories go, you know. So the point is that there's two things here. It might be true that he is cheating on me, and it might not be. And that's part of the craziness because we don't know what's true. So let's not worry about that. Let's not worry, he might be cheating or he might not. That isn't the issue here. The issue is the fact that I'm jealous. Because if he comes home and says, I didn't look, then I see I have no basis for jealousy, but I've still got the tendency to be jealous, and that's the problem. That's the problem. You see, whereas we are convinced there wouldn't be jealousy in my mind if Paros weren't cheating on me. But that's just not true. We know that. So my problem is not the fact that he is or isn't cheating. My problem is I think he is. And then the consequences of that, which is called jealousy. So then what, look at, you know, I like to say in these negative states of mind, as opposed to the positive, and they're both opinions. But the Buddha would say that the virtuous ones are more linked to validity and more linked to reality. And reality, in a simple sense, is that everything is existing interdependently. And when the virtues are prevalent, there's a sense of connectedness, of interdependence. I'll go into this later. So the negative ones are completely neurotic. They're completely based on a separate sense of miserable, lonely, unhappy little me. But the irony of ego is it's not strong and big and powerful, as we call ego. It's actually fragile. This limited, fragile, broken sense of a small, nothing me, which is frantic. It's based in fear. This is way deep down. So this root delusion, as they call them, the root neurosis, the root disturbing emotion, the root misconception, is known, like I said before, as ego grasping. It's this deeply held, primordially held misconception about my own very self, the very status of my own self. On the basis of that, there is the one that we are talking about, which is effectively the main problem in our daily life. To the highest degrees of greatest practitioners still have this. It's a long way to go. This goes to extremely subtle levels. It's only when you really finally practically realize emptiness that you've got rid of attachment. It's extraordinarily subtle. So the attachment is this main voice of this neurotic sense of I. Naturally, as the sense of I is a sense of a cut off, bereft, lonely, nothing, small, panic-stricken I, then naturally the main voice of it, this enormous sense of dissatisfaction, which gives rise to this enormous craving for something to fill up the gaping hole, which then gives rise to manipulating and controlling to get something and expecting it, and then exaggerating its deliciousness and then possessing it. These are all the functions of attachment. It's like multifaceted, and it's unbelievably subtle degrees of it. This is this frantic neediness to get what that supposed I wants every millisecond. So it's really hard to see it until it doesn't get what it wants. So throughout the day, bad things happen. That's because attachment isn't getting what it wants. That's what that suffering is. And that's really an odd way to say it, because we just think it's normal you'll get upset if Paros is cheating on you. It's normal you get upset if the lights are red for 10 minutes and there's a traffic block, you know. It's normal when you walk into a busy room of crazy people you're going to get upset. We don't ever question that. That's why Neil's words in the beginning were so perfect. That's exactly what we feel and believe. All Buddha's doing is arguing with this. He says, no, of course you can change it. So we have to become familiar with them. And I have to say, most of the time when people study Buddhism, we don't study this much. We talk about mindfulness. That's about it. The best thing that people can know about Buddhism is you've got to be mindful. I mean, that's so cliched, I can't even describe it to you, you know. It's so embarrassingly cliched. Got this incredible, subtle, clear awareness of your own thoughts to a degree of subtlety that in our culture we would not even posit as possible, you know. So the key starting point, like I'm saying, is to even understand theoretically this model of the mind. So I'll say it again. We've got sensory consciousness, remember? The eyes, ears and nose. And we make the body the boss, as Lama Yeshe says. And this is already unbelievably distressing and unbelievably leading us up garden paths. We judge everything in terms of how they affect our senses, you know. But the Buddha says it's complete misconception. Like I said, if I look at a pretty cup, I say there's a pretty cup. My eyes can only see shape and colour. They're not capable of anything else. It's my mental consciousness, my thoughts that I've built up in my life about my taste, what things are, my memory, it's a cup, it's this, and what I like, and I come up with a concept, an opinion called what a pretty cup. Everything that goes on in our daily life. We're seeing a bunch of shapes and colours, aren't we, through our eyes. We're hearing a bunch of mere sounds through our ears. The rest of it that is the stories in our mind, our mental consciousness, raving on. All these elaborate conceptual stories all day. And as Lama Zopa says, most people don't even know that what goes on in their mind, these thoughts, play any role at all, which means we're so addicted to only the outside. And then we have opinions, but we don't think they're opinions. This is the tragedy. Bad enough that I have this opinion about that thing, but the worst thing is I believe my opinion is the truth, not even coming from my mind, it's truth in the thing itself. We're so remote and disconnected, Buddha's saying, from reality. It's very fascinating. This is the source of our suffering. So, what's the analysis I do if I'm trying to do this work I'm talking about before Panos gets home? Well, I'll be sitting there having you're having a panic attack. But because you're noticing your mind, you've been practicing, you're aware of the thoughts and you're able to talk yourself through. Because normally what happens when a habit is very strong, you know you're angry, but there's nothing in the universe going to stop you from being involved in those thoughts. You hear them raging, but you're fully involved in the story and nothing in you. Like, I sort of joke and talk about all my roommates, meaning all my different thoughts. And you've got all these crazy roommates and you've got the virtuous roommates. Well, half the time the crazy roommates are running the show, aren't they? And the good roommates, like wisdom and clarity and intelligence and kindness and patience, they're hiding under the bed. They don't want to come out. Because the bad guys are running the show. Does it not? And so when I'm in this fit of raging, my mind uncontrolled, the jealousy, the anger, the pain, raging, isn't it? There's none of my virtues. I can't, you can't even hear the virtuous thoughts because they're crowded out by the crazy thoughts. We can see this. So it's easy to say, change your thoughts, but look at the courage it must take. That woman, I can't believe her courage, her intelligence. The inner work she must have done to get to that simple statement. I'm not a monk. I'm not a prisoner, I'm a monk. I'm not in a cell, I'm in a cave. So she became happy. That's the point. She changed her interpretation of that nightmarish situation. This is astonishing. This is absolutely just, I think, so courageous. So the jealousy, so there's a hierarchy, like I said. The root one is this sense of I. On the basis of this frantic attachment, this junkie in there. Really it's like that, the best way to put it. That's frantic to get what that supposed I wants every second. That's running it. And then the panic attack when it's threatened. So like the thought of Panos cheating on me. The panic attack that rises is almost unbearable, isn't it? And that we call jealousy. So we look at jealousy, it's surprising, but it's very rooted in anger. How dare, It's based on attachment, of course it is. But freaking out. It's like your heart's been ripped out. So how would I begin to talk to myself? Well, you can take any aspect you like. If karma is very powerful for you as a philosophy, then I could take that as my argument, trying to calm myself down, steady myself. Well, Robina, you've got this relationship with this person, and you've noticed there's a tendency he's got, and you notice you've got a tendency to get jealous, so there must be some karma there between you, and this is due to your own past actions of cheating in relationships. So, you've got to accept that this is going to be in the way you interpret, but blah, 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 and you try to talk yourself. It's like talking to a friend to calm them down, using logic to help them, to help you. But here you're being your own therapist. Your virtuous thoughts come out and argue with this one. That's one approach. In the beginning, of course, it's very fragile. It doesn't work very much. But the more you do it, you'd end up being like my friend Jigdrol, who simply laughed and said, what do you mean, angry Robina? It's our own fault. Because for him it was a truth. So he didn't get upset. This is so astonishing to us. But then the anger one, which is massive. raging angry at him. How dare he do this to me? I don't deserve it. That's what anger says. How dare he do this to me? So then the karma's a very good argument against that one. Excuse me, Robina. What do you mean you don't deserve it? That's an instinct of anger, but it's not valid. If I take on board, Robina, you say to yourself, this is what you're doing, this is what we do. What else would you do but that? You have to argue with the thoughts that are coming out. You argue with them. Because anger is the response. So then the anger is a misconception. Literally, how dare he do that to me? I don't deserve it. If you're doing an analysis here, if you have the view of karma, it isn't true. Technically, you do. But don't use the word deserve because it's so heavy. You must have created the cause. If something one of the key things in karma, remember, if you're using karma as your view, karma is everything that happens to you. This is called experiences similar to the cause. All the stuff that happens to you at the hands of other people. This particular track of karma is called experiences similar to the cause. Keep reminding, just the same, when you're delighting, because Panos comes home and gives you, gives you some money, he just got a gift. Wow, how kind, Panos, thank you so much, you're so generous. Then instead of greedily taking it, you'd remind yourself, well, I must have created the cause by being generous in the past. Look, I'm getting the karmic results. So if you can own the good things, then it's easy to own the bad. If you take the good for granted, like this little greedy vampire, well, I deserve 50 euros. Well, then, you're not going to learn much. Then you'll be freaking out when you don't get the 50 euros and when he does cheat on you. So good things and bad things, all of my life, the Buddha would say, is the fruit of my past actions. I'm the main cause of it. I am the main cause of it. So this whole analysis is bringing it back to yourself and looking at these states of mind. So the anger is not a valid one. It's ridiculous. It's this hysterical, fear-based, over-exaggeration, this panic attack. It's a panic attack, basically. Look at a child having an angry fit. We go, oh, he's just angry. But excuse me, look at it. They're having a serious panic attack. Huh?
Seizure.
No, but I mean literally. But we go, oh, anger's normal. No, anger's not normal. Buddha would say it's a mental illness. That's another term, I think, Buddhist psychology, I think Buddha would really like that term. It's one we use in languages, and it's really intense. You've got a mental illness. That's something shocking. Well, that's a perfect term for the Buddha. Anger is a mental illness. Attachment is a mental illness. Jealousy is a mental illness. These neuroses are mental illnesses. This is such a literally true statement, But it's very shocking to our ears because we have a very kind of strong definition of mental illness, and that never includes us. That's way at the other end. The real wackos, The Buddha says we're all wackos. It's just a question of degree. I'm not kidding when I say things like that. And then, of course, the root one, day to day, is the attachment, which is this massive, massive hunger for Panos' approval, love, stroking, giving, looking at me, satisfying my bottomless pit of neediness, which is attachment. This is more, in this neediness, like I mentioned briefly yesterday, this attachment to being seen by others in a good light, the attachment to being liked and approved of is more strong than attachment to sex, attachment to food, attachment to drugs, attachment to money. It's the deepest one inside us. It's the one that's closest to the way Buddha talks about ego grasping. This constant, because attachment is this primordial assumption that I am just like nothing. I'm not enough, but almost like nothing. So therefore have to be constantly seen, kind of reflected back to myself. We don't think we're anything, do we? Until someone says, you're a nice person, Robina. This is very fascinating. What is it about us? Why is it, you'd think, we can't see it ourselves? If someone says, you're a wonderful person, Robina, why is it we can't see it ourselves? We've got to ask that question. That's because of attachment, Buddha says. This deep sense of being nothing. This deep sense of being nobody. So since we're born, we're looking like a vampire, craving the good feedback, craving mummy to say you're a lovely little girl and hearing you and looking at you and giving you. This is, I mean, there's a virtuous part of that. Mummy must be loving to her child to help her grow up. But this attachment is this bottomless, terrible sense of being nobody. That's why we crave people to like us. It sounds so shocking to speak such an evident truth, you know, as being a problem. We say all these words in our own culture, becoming our own person. That's utterly the point. That's what Buddha is saying. Every single thing we are is in us already. It can't be anywhere else but inside us. And it's in our mind. That's where all the potential is. That's where all the perfection is. That's where all the bliss is. That's where all the qualities are. That's the source of our happiness. The stuff that's polluting it is these ridiculous misconceptions, these disturbing emotions, these delusional mental illnesses that we think are normal because everybody has them. So you could put it this way, I would say, is Buddha just goes to a subtler degree, that's all, of what's possible. So I'd argue with myself. I'd look at the anger, I'd see how it's a response because attachment isn't getting what it wants, and then really, I mean, really then to look deeply at the attachment, which is the basis of anger, the basis of the panic attack, of not getting what this little I wants. And then you look most deeply at the very sense of the I. That's the deepest one. That's when we talk about the Buddhist teachings about emptiness, which we'll talk about. And all this stuff leads to that, the subtlest one, the subtlest misconception in the mind, the subtlest kind of disturbing emotion deep in our bones, the very sense of our own I. Buddha says it's kind of broken and kind of, you know, not valid. So I keep saying, we think all these states of mind are normal. And then secondly, we think they're caused by the outside person, or indeed by our mummy and our genes and our rest of it. So that's why we keep looking only there. Buddha says that's the mistake. He's not saying you can't look at the outside. Please look at what your mother did and father did. Indeed, look at Paros. It's helpful, but you're not solving the problem. You're not solving the problem. This is our worst mistake. Because until we can have the courage to recognize that what goes on in my mind is the central player, you know, nothing will change. Nothing will change. That's why people literally do go mad when you can't change the outside. Like that guy. So but these thoughts are incredibly subtle, that's the trouble. And they're going like 1,000,000 miles an hour. And they're packed, from Buddha would say, many lifetimes of practice, packed solid with layers and layers and layers of this emotional component. So in other words, why, you know, like since a little girl, anger was one of my main trips, right? And I didn't need to be taught anger. My mother didn't have to show me how to get angry. Come on, darling, clench your fist tighter, scream louder, no, louder, louder. I knew how. I had it down to perfection, I promise. And we can see this with attachment, you know, you don't get any taught. They're very deeply ingrained, you know, attachment especially. I mean, why do you wake up as a monkey one life and you know, the moment you come out of mummy's womb, you turn around and have sex with her? Then with your daddy and your uncle and your auntie and your grandpa and your sisters and your strangers. That's the karma of some monkeys, right? Well, that's very attached to sex, isn't it? I mean, it sounds a joke to us when we talk like this. But this is the reason anybody comes out of the womb and does anything. Why that little boy was crying with compassion for the lice. Why that little monkey jumped on his mummy to have sex. Very strongly attached to sex, that's all. Habits. Why Mozart was, you know, he's given a piano at the age of 6 or something, off he goes writing his sonatas. So if you take the view of karma, it kind of fits as at least as an intellectual explanation for how come you're born with certain habits. Whether they're good or bad, you know.
This example of attachment does make sense.
That's interesting. Okay.
I cannot reconcile in my mind though, I mean the guy that told you that he's totally undisturbed because his brother and father died, because it's their fault.
But they're your words for it, he doesn't, I know, okay, so good, okay, talk.
I just want to
good. Say it. Good.
For you is very good because he's got no attachments, right? No mental illness in this sense. This doesn't. I cannot reconcile it when I think about the other side of the equation.
Which one?
For example.
Go on then, talk.
Because it cannot be possible. I cannot reconcile the attachment as a mental illness when it comes to love.
I understand.
Which means I cannot love my children.
I understand, Uzi. No, I understand. No, it's not like, it doesn't come out like that. It's much more nuanced than that. So let me just, okay, so if we take this view that we've got one set of states of mind that are exaggerating, distorted, fear-based, we have to take that one, right, as this and then attachment, this massive one that over-exaggerates certain characteristics, which is then what makes us have friends, enemies and strangers. Can you hear the logic of that? So now, okay, if you were to give up attachment, and you'd be pretty advanced if you have, you would have incredible love for your child. There's no way you'd not have love for your child, and you wouldn't give. When you give up attachment, you don't give up caring. It's the opposite. Attachment is an over-exaggerating, clinging and grasping. But if you've given that up, what you've got left is infinite love. Much more love than you had before. Because if you're a parent and you're very attached and one day you wake up and you're really angry and annoyed, your kid will make you crazy and you'll shout at them because your attachment is unhappy. The next day, because you're feeling relaxed, you'll be all loving to your kid. So it's really unstable. Whereas if you've given up attachment, there won't be anger. You'll only have love for your child plus wisdom to know exactly how to help them. The love is, as a result, love isn't given up when you give up attachment. That's because we use these almost synonymously, I think, in general. But if you've given up attachment, the commonest conception we have is that you become detached. But if you, in relation to human beings, when you give up attachment, you increase your love automatically. That's a really important point to say, so thank you for mentioning it. Like, if let's say you're attached to alcohol, that's different. You don't want to love alcohol. You want to become detached from it. That's better. That's good. That's intelligent. But for a human being, if you become detached, then you become uncaring. You've not only given up attachment, you've given up love as well. And that's really deluded. That's really not the point at all. So if I'm having a relationship with you, as I lessen my attachment for you, which is my neediness, my expectations, all the drama in me, I'll lessen my anger, I'll lessen my jealousy. Just naturally, I'll have more empathy, more connection, more kindness, more patience, more love and more compassion. That will be automatic. That's a really important point. Thank you for mentioning.
More love, I'm not having more attachment?
No way, because that's the Buddha's point from day one. This is the point that is not how we think in the world. We give equal status to a thing that we might call attachment and a thing we call love. We think they're both normal states of a normal human, to the point where if even we talked in Western psychology about giving up what Buddha would call attachment, we would think it's abnormal. So it's very hard to hear the way Buddha's saying it. So we have to take this assumption that there are these series of states of mind that are polluted and delusional and exaggerated and are the source of our pain. And there are those that are valid and reasonable and are joyful and the source of our happiness. And the ones that are valid, like love and compassion. Okay, if I'm mainly attached to you, then I'd be fighting with you when you don't do what I want. But if I mainly love you, I'd be patient, I'd be connected, I'd be calm, I'd be steady, I'd be seeing things from your point of view. But the delusions are completely neurotic, frantic, fear and I-based. And when they're really strong, they drive everything else away. Why do you think relationships go crazy? It's not because you love people. We say it like that. So it takes a while to really see the different ways that these states of mind are interpreted by Buddhist psychology. You see my point, Uzi?
I see the point. I don't know how to get there.
No, I understand that. I hear you. No, I know. I hear you. I really, really hear you. I really hear that's a really valid point, because it's quite subtle what the Buddha's saying. It is really quite a subtle point, because almost for us they're indistinguishable. They come together. It seems natural, you know, because I am attached to those I love. And I love those I'm attached to. It seems axiomatic that you'd have one if you had the other. So you think if you have one, wouldn't have one, you don't have the other. That's how we are now. Because when you cheat on me and, you know, and you throw me out and move in with Angeli Key, of course I'm going to go, you're going to overnight from being attached to you to wanting to kill you. So now anger has taken over. And the love goes, when the attachment goes, so does the love. That's our problem. But the Buddha's view is we can get to the point where we can give up the attachment, but grow the love. And even have a, you know, and this is why Jigdral, his response was, what do you mean angry, Robina? It's our own fault. Meaning he didn't have resentment and bitterness and fear and panic and how dare and why is this happening to us? He has a reason why. He has a reason why, but he's still out there demonstrating because it's the right thing to do, but his mind was probably not very disturbed. That's hard for our minds. I agree with you. I agree with you. Or those two young women, those two young nuns, abused and sexually abused and tortured in prison. And then finally she said, and we had compassion for our torturers. Well, that's intense. I agree with you. These are the consequences of this view. But I mean, that rabbi, you know, this Jewish rabbi, he was cracking jokes about Hitler, mate. I don't hear Jews crack jokes about Hitler. This rabbi shocked me, you know. He was funny, he was laughing. He said, my mother, in Israel, my mother would not have one bad word about the Arabs. She'd chuck anybody out. So there's something interesting about that. I thought that was really interesting, you know. So there wasn't anger in his mind. And if there's no anger, there's not much attachment. And when there's not much attachment, not much anger, you've got more compassion, more love, more spaciousness, and you don't go crazy. It's a very different model, I agree with you. What else, people? Any other thoughts?
Can you say it's about your reactions to your attachments that you're trying to work on?
Well, you see, the way you're using, let's just be technical about it, the way you're using the word attachment there is how we often use it is for the object. But here we're using it to refer to the state of mind that does the clinging, does the manipulating, does the possessing. Do you understand? So you're working on that, the lessening of the exact, because one of the...
So the reaction would be natural, would it be a...
Say some more.
So your reaction, if you work on it internally, is you don't react?
No, not reacting is not the issue so much. Not reacting, let me think. So give it a simple example. You mean like attachment to chocolate cake or something? Something simple like that, yeah? Well, first of all, the attachment to food is quite deep. Would people agree? One of the signs of attachment is you think about it when it's not there. Is that a good indication? I mean, some people it might be sex. You think about girls all day. Some people it might be money. I mean, we understand this point. You know, people, even little kids, we can already see the things we're going to be attached to as we get older. Some people think about their wedding. I mean, I remember reading one girl, since she's 5, she's been organising a wedding, you know. I mean, really, we do this. Some people think only about money, about food, about our body. That's a sign of attachment, because one of the key bare bones function of this state of mind called attachment is it over-exaggerates the importance of the object. So you think about it all the time, and then you want it, and you manipulate to get it, and then you get it, and then you see it, and you over-exaggerate it, and then you're anticipating all the happiness to come, then you get it, and then that's all called attachment. That's called it.
Not your reaction to your attachment.
But that's called attachment. No, attachment's the name of the... You're using reaction, because that's a common word that some people use and they talk like this. Reaction is attachment. Attachment's the name of the... Well, no, because anger is also a reaction. So you're using the word reaction for the way you respond to seeing the cake. Yes, so attachment is one of the reactions. Anger, aversion, oh, I can't stand chocolate cake, get it out of my sight. That's another reaction. That's called anger. One's called attachment, one's called jealousy. These simple words for the emotions we have, they're the names of these different reactions, using your word. Do you understand? So the aim is not necessarily not to react. Like, you could, one of the early little techniques Buddha would give would be, you know, if I'm starting to get angry, just imagine you've turned to a block of wood. Well, I always found that so silly, I never bothered, you know, it's just like ridiculous, but it sounds reasonable. That's merely don't react. Don't go there. Okay, this is a really interesting point now. All right. We can see, can't we, that we've got lots of these reactions. This is a good word, isn't it? We rush off here, we rush off there, we get angry, and you know, and it's all pouring out our mouth or expressing it through our hands by shoving in the cake, you know. So this is why, this sounds so kind of boring, but it's really logical. The very first level of practice, if you know, The Buddhist teachings are actually presented in a very incremental way according to capacity, according to, like any body of knowledge. You don't start grade 12 music first, you start with grade 1. Well, grade 1, entry level, junior school in Buddhism, given that we're driven by all these reactions, you know, Annika's saying, we're driven by attachment, by anger, by jealousy, but the attachment one's pretty massive, starting point. Given that we're driven by those, the first practice is control your body and control your speech, and don't shove the second piece in. Keep your hand in your lap, you know, and then don't say those mean words. I mean, we could see, you know, if you look in the world, if we take the view the mind is the problem, but it's the body and the speech that do that carry out the wishes of the crazy mind, isn't it? It's the body and speech that do the harm. So it's really it's a profound practice actually to control your body and control your speech. It's like doing what your grandma said, behave nicely. It's called behaviour. It's not just superficial, it's kind of profound. And obviously if you're really sincerely practicing every day, controlling your behaviour, at least at the first level, don't harm others, don't cheat on your partner, don't take things that aren't given to you, don't kill things. I mean, it's sort of obvious. If you're controlling your behaviour, then naturally the delusions that are driving the behaviour will become more evident to you. And now you can go to high school and do this job we're discussing, which is work on your mind. Part of the reason, I mean, you tell me as a little girl, my mother say to me, go and sit down and look at your anger, Robina. I wouldn't know what she was talking about because I'm a little girl for a start, deeply habitual, will just be exploding all over the place. So you've got to subdue your crazy behaviour first. And this is not, I mean, it sounds boring almost to think that's a spiritual practice. It's just called practicing good ethics, you know. But it's profound. Think of our speech. I think speech is really interesting. You know, you can get arrested for stealing €5, but you can shout at somebody all day, you won't get arrested. Because we consider the body very powerful property, you know. But just using lousy speech, it's not such a big deal. So we don't think it's so important. I always think about my family lately. We've got 7 siblings, all born very close to each other, very intense, all bossy like me. Loud, talking fast, you know. So anyway, with 6 sisters and a brother. The point is, when we were very little, we didn't have enough beds. We were always poor, so we were always fighting. Naturally, get a bunch of little kids together, you're going to fight. It's not fair to expect anything else. And then, as we got older, we'd come home for Christmas, and then we'd fight. Then you'd talk to Polly about what Julie said, and Janet said this is about Mary, and Tony said this is about Polly, and you go on, you know. So the last 20 or so years, we've all got quite old, you know. There's sort of been this unspoken agreement that we don't talk about each other behind our backs negatively, and we don't speak about things we don't agree with when we're together. So the consequence is there's this incredibly harmonious, sweet feeling between us. I mean, it's really powerful. It seems such a simple thing. Look at how most of us speak things, you know. You can't wait to get home to tell your hubby about that horrible person at work. You can't wait to talk to that sister about this sister. We love to blurt out our mouths. And we think it's so meaningless and innocuous. Speech is nothing special, you know. But even if for your own sake, if you're saying angry words all day, how's it affecting you? I mean, why are you surprised you're upset by the end of the day? I mean, we really are surprised. We really don't see a connection between saying angry words about the politicians all day and wondering why we're distressed at night. I mean, it's sort of so obvious it's a joke, but we don't see the connection. So even for our own sake, to learn to have some control of our mind over our speech, for our own sake, not to mention the sake of, you know, other people. So this is a really first level of practice, which is why in Buddhism, when you formally become a Buddhist, you formalize your Buddhism by taking refuge. Then you then take vows that enable you strongly to remember that you want to live in a certain way for your sake, not to mention the sake of others. And a vow is like when you learn to drive a car, you're basically memorizing a bunch of vows, aren't you? I will not drive over the speed limit. I will not put the foot on the brake at the same time as the clutch. I will not go into the wrong lane at the wrong time. You're doing a bunch of don'ts, but you don't call them vows. You understand my point? It's just a series of instructions to help you be a better driver. Well, vows, don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, are a series of instructions to help you become a better human being. It's hardly surprising. This then gives you more opportunity to see your mind, which is the real job, you know, and then to be distinguishing every second all these reactions. If you think about one day, I mean, you couldn't count the number of thoughts we had, opinions or reactions about what we've seen and heard. And they're the ones we have to start being analytical about. So the Buddha's deal is, you know, those that are called attachment, aversion, jealousy. I mean, these few little things, I mean, it's almost enough to describe the entirety of our suffering, you know. To start to be able to interpret in our own mind the different thoughts and what are they? Are they valid or not? See, this is so heavy for us when it comes to morality. If we were talking mathematics, we know you've got to have valid thoughts. And so to have the thought 1 + 1 is 3, you don't think you're going to go to hell because you think 1 + 1 is 3. You just know it's the wrong thought. You don't get all upset and guilty. But if you have an angry thought, you think, oh, I'm a bad person. It's so ridiculous, you know. That is a valid thought. If you have valid thoughts in mathematics, you'll be able to add things up and subtract and get the right answer. If you've got valid thoughts in your head about botany, you'll be able to grow flowers. Well, Buddha's the same approach. The invalid thoughts, the distorted, exaggerated, disturbing ones, aren't valid because they're made up stories and they're exaggerations and they cause you pain, honey. And they prevent you from seeing reality. And the valid thoughts, you know, are love and kindness. So let's look at this and why. You know, and let's say, you know, Annika's there, and let's say we're having a chat. And people look on and they say, oh, look at Annika and Robina, they're loving each other. Now, that we mightn't say that, but we are literally, in the sense that love is under the positive heading. Love here, the way Buddhism is interpreting it, is a valid, altruistic state of mind. It's necessarily connected to others. So when I'm listening to Annika's story, and I'm saying, oh, I'm so happy for you, that's called love. When I say, oh, I'm so happy for you, that's love. If she tells me about her headache, and I say, I'm so sorry, Annika, that's called compassion. So we just look like we're having a normal conversation. But you can tell by the way we look and our body language that we must be having virtuous thoughts because we're feeling harmonious. Is it not true? It's so reasonable and normal. They're harmonious, virtuous, valid states of mind that are running between us. So the feeling is of not just there's a feeling of connectedness, isn't there? There's a feeling of we, isn't there? Now look what happens when we get angry. Suddenly the we is cut in half. There's poor little unhappy Robina over here looking all freaking out. There's Annika over there looking all, you said this, no, you said that. Now we're unhappy, we're jealous, we're angry, we're hurt, and this is the mental illness has taken over. Now suddenly the delusions are now prevalent. And these are not valid because my anger is over-exaggerating the thing that she just said. Her attachment got really offended because I said this because she thinks therefore I was jealous or something. We've got all these ridiculous stories racing around our head. There's no longer any sense of we. There's no longer any sense of empathy. There's a sense of two separate, unhappy, miserable, neurotic people. Am I not describing what we know all day, every day? Well, that's the proof. The Buddha's view, in one sense, there's two things. One is these unhappy emotions are disturbing. They're painful. Right there, the having of them, my heart is broken. It is unbearable, we know this. But the other characteristic, the key one, is how they're not valid because if we analyse the thoughts that we are saying, if we wrote all this down and did a little analysis, we'd see that my anger is exaggerating what she said. Her jealousy is exaggerating this. Attachment is exaggerating. They're all distorted thoughts. So they're not based in reality. Whereas the loving thoughts and the kind thoughts and the compassionate thoughts are based in reality. And reality is that things are interdependent. Reality, the way Buddha talks about reality at a conventional level, reality is that things are interdependent. Reality is that things are working harmoniously, and when things are all in sync, that's because everything's in touch with reality. Reality is that things are interdependent. And then the ego is caught up with uninterdependence, the opposite. Independent me, mean independent you. This is, I mean, we're going to go to this more, talking about this fundamental way that things exist, according to the Buddha.
You're putting all the categories, the love, the hate, in one category, and you're putting attachment with them.
No, attachment, no, hate and attachment are under the negative heading, and love and compassion are under the positive.
Doesn't matter.
So what's the problem?
It's not a problem. The way my head translates is that attachment is really the exaggeration of all these reactions. So that's really the answer to what you asked you the first question that Annika asked you.
What do you mean
How
attachment?
my mind translates it.
What do you mean? Well, that's fine. You're allowed to have that. I'm just.
The attachment on its own is not is not a bad or a good factor. The exaggeration
I understand.
of these different factors is the benefit.
That's fine, but that's not what I'm saying. That's all. You can say that, but it's not what I'm saying. I am saying, in fact, attachment is the main delusion, Buddha says, in day-to-day life, and itself is an exaggeration. So I understand you can have that definition, but it's not the one I'm saying.
Okay.
That's all. I mean, we're allowed to have different definitions, and I'm not saying this is the fundamental one in Buddhism. Any other questions, people? Are we communicating, or is it just overwhelming, or is it kind of confusing, or is it...
What about sadness?
What about what?
Sadness.
Oozing. Sadness. You see, it's very interesting. I think it's, if we take the Buddhist view of these different states of mind, it's a mixture of several. Because I think it's not, in Buddhist psychology, do they use the word sadness? Well, that must be there, because it's human quality. So hasn't that got some feeling of what we call depression? Isn't it? Mostly I'd say sad is depressed, don't you think? Sad?
Is what?
Depression. Yeah. So, okay, let's analyse depression. All right. If we can take this view, and this is for this conversation, Uzi, you've got to take on board this definition, otherwise it'll be confusing, that the driving force in our daily life, ever so subtle, is an assumption, at the level of an assumption. This frantic, I-based craving at a very subtle level, and it manifests grossly, obviously, to get the nice things every second. Think of it just very simply. Simple. Did you have a nice day today, Robina? Yes. And I'll proceed to describe all the nice things. Panos was kind, the food was delicious, the sky was blue, the lights were green all the time. So putting it in this way, that's attachment getting what it wants every moment. So attachment is this neediness to get the nice things every moment, or even more, to get what I want every moment. It's very ingrained deep inside at the level of assumption. Can we hear that point first? Can you recognize? Does that make sense, Uzi? We kind of know it's true. You see a kid, and you can see that they get upset when they don't get what they want. Well, that's all. We're all like that, but at much more subtle or more gross degrees. So then what happens is the mental state that pops up the millisecond the object comes along that isn't what attachment wants. Panos doesn't say the right word. The red light comes. The wrong cake is served. The weather is cold. I'm talking ordinary, simple things, because this happens so subtly. The moment that arises, then attachment is sort of like it gets a shock. That's not what I wanted. And so that moment is the arising of the state of mind called aversion. So the most bare bones level of attachment is when the object out there is what you want, you go, ooh, that's nice, gimme, gimme. When the object isn't what you want, you go, oh no, go away. The most basic level, can you recognise this? Can you recognise this? Ordinary level, ordinary. That's attachment, which is the default. And then oh, I don't want the red light. I don't want carrot cake. How dare you say that? That's called aversion, the bare bones state of mind. It's a thought, and it arises deeply and spontaneously because attachment is like this junkie driving that only wants what it wants every second. So, some aversion has many ways of expressing itself. In a person like me, in my life, it would be strong anger. I'd shout, I'd kick, I'd punch, I'd yell, something like this. That's called anger. That's normal. We get that. We see it. There are mild versions of anger. We don't even think they're a problem. But you'd get irritated. You'd say, I'm annoyed, irritated, frustrated. These are normal words. Do we not use these in our daily life all the time? And you don't go to your therapist because you feel annoyed, do you? She thinks you're stupid until you shut up and go home. Because it doesn't seem a big deal to be annoyed. But annoyance is aversion. Is thwarted attachment that just didn't get what it wanted. So it's a mild level of anger. Can you hear that technically? people? Are we communicating? So a person who doesn't have a tendency to get angry externally, and because for the crucial point that Buddha's making is everything we experience, it doesn't disappear, it stays programmed in us. But we're not paying attention 99% of the time. So when a person has, we've all got attachment. Everybody's attachment wants what it wants every second, and it's guaranteed in life it won't get it many times. So the person who doesn't have volatile anger, their aversion still arises, but it goes, you build it up, and one day you can't get out of bed. Because it's built up from many, many, many years even of occasions of attachment not getting what it wants. It's way more subtle, but it's the same process. Like I said, there's a friend of mine, who's a Buddhist, and she's a really peaceful kind of person. But now, 60 years later, she's 60, she's now discovering all this repressed aversion, which is what depression is. I'm not saying it's good to express it, because at least if you don't express it, you're not harming other people. But the one advantage of being angry is you can't deny you've got aversion. Do you understand?
Is that what she was doing?
Who?
Your friend.
In denial and suppression.
I'm talking about all of us. This is what depression is. But that's what depression is. Yes, you don't deny it on purpose, but you just don't notice it. We don't notice. We don't notice things it's only when it's very gross that we notice our emotions. Yeah. We don't notice things more subtle because we never look inside. Even the level now that we notice our emotions is so gross in comparison with the subtlety that we can go to. So all I'm saying is the person, and okay, there's another little interesting point here too. If we think about attachment, I often joke about the good girls and the bad girls. Well, she's a really typical good girl. Meaning, so then attachment is playing a role in that kind of person. Attached to being, we're all attached to a certain view we have of ourselves. We've got a very vivid sense, we don't realise it sometimes, of the kind of person we are. And so a person who's also patient, because a person who gets depressed is in a sense patient. They're not getting upset when the thing goes wrong, but they have got upset there, but it's not noticeable, so it builds up. Are you seeing that point? The other point is, we're all attached to different things, and so some of us, we're all attached to wanting to be good girls. We're all attached to wanting to be liked. So especially the patient girl definitely has got strong attachment to being the good girl. So one of my sisters, we joke about it. She's always the one who made everything nice and helped mummy and helped daddy, and because she didn't like upsetting the apple cart, she would always try to make everything lovely because she couldn't cope with all the disruptions. Whereas I didn't mind disruptions, So Julie would spend all her life being a good girl because her attachment couldn't stand the thought of a fight. So it's attachment as well. So you get that attachment to being seen as a good girl, always doing the nice things, then for sure you will not notice your aversion. So eventually one day, 60 years later, 10 years later, it's all this buried stuff. And I mean, Buddha's saying most of our stuff's buried. We don't pay attention to most of it. So if we even paid attention to a little bit every day as it happened, we'd be fine by the end of the day. But Buddha says not only have we suppressed this lifetime of stuff, but lifetimes of stuff. Can you sort of hear the principle, the way they talk or not? So that this is, so we're on autopilot 99% of the time. And because we've got this dualistic view about morality, I'm a naughty girl if I get angry, then of course that would increase your wish to completely put it away and not show any aversion at all, because you've got to be a nice girl. And that makes extra trouble. You understand? Or the angry type person, you'd always find a valid reason why I'm allowed to be angry. So that means you keep being angry. Because ego wants to get off the hook. Ego doesn't want to be pointing to itself. Ego just wants to blame everybody else. Put it all away, It's very tricky, I think. But depression really is understandable if we think of it that way. But it is really just suppressed. And the Buddha's view is that not a single thing that we experience goes astray. Everything gets programmed in the mind. It's all stored away there. We don't deal with it when it arises. I mean, it's no wonder we kill each other. No wonder we kill ourselves. No wonder we go crazy every day. It's natural because we're not dealing with what's going on. That's why that woman in prison was pretty incredible. She dealt with what was going on in her own mind and took control until the point where she was a happy human being. That's pretty amazing, Isn't it? Stupendous, actually. Hard to imagine it.
Hard to imagine.
Hard to imagine it,
nice to know that you can get...
That's right, precisely. That's the whole point, The bonus was she got out too. I was so happy for her. And then even the more bonus, I read all the newspapers, right? I like to read my newspapers. I know this sounds hilarious, but one of my favourite sections of the New York Times is the weddings section. Really. And on my iPads, always every weekend, so they have all these stories. Because I was just reading about human beings. I remember reading her 5 years ago. She went to Ireland for some conference, and she met an ex-IRA guy who'd spent his years in prison, and they fell in love and got married. I was very happy for her. I thought that was a very nice story. So you people, what is it, tea time already? Or more questions? Yes, go darling.
So basically all the negative emotions that drive us to anger, to pain,
That's right.
sorrow, and so on, is all related to attachment.
Yes, the Buddha would say.
Also,
yes.
Also when we feel like pain because somebody we love died and so on, everything is in time.
Okay, so that's why I think there's a mixture there. So, you know, again, if you got, let's say you got lots of attachment, which would mean neediness, relying on that existence of that person, you define yourself by that person's existence. So the more you've got neediness and attachment, don't hear it in a good way, Uzi. I'm not talking love here, I'm talking this neurotic, deluded craving for something that is just painful if we see it nakedly. So when there's strong attachment for a certain person, and this is not criticizing, we're human. We've got a baby. I mean, I can't conceive of the pain of a mother losing a baby, right? Because the intensity of the attachment there has to be so, as well as the infinite love, as well as a strong karmic connection with this little sentient being. So that the pain would be unbearable. But you could still say the more internally healthy the person is, which means less attachment, less anger, more fearlessness, more contentment, more love, more kindness, they wouldn't suffer so severely. I don't mean they just don't care. That's not the opposite of suffering. They'd still be in tears, the sadness, but it wouldn't destroy their heart, wouldn't rip their heart out. That's because of attachment. I remember meeting one person whose beloved passed away 5 years before. He was still like in a serious mental breakdown. He could think of nothing else. Now that's unhealthy, meaning it's attachment. It's incredibly nuanced, incredibly subtle, you know. And because these definitions are not the way we tend to use them, we mix them with some of the good things, it's hard to hear it, you know. So in other words, the less attached, less depressed, less angry, less jealous, less neurotic you are, the more kind, the more fearless, the more courageous, the more wise, the more clear, the more joyful, the more loving, the more kind. That's automatic. And that's kind of feels a bit better than saying, give up attachment, you become this kind of don't care person. It's horrible to think that. Not like that at all. I like to think of it, and this is really Buddha's point. They talk a lot in the Buddhist literature about the nature of mind, how mind in its nature is clear. That what they mean by that is, like if we take something like water, we know it's H2O, let's say, 2 bits of H, 1 bit of O, we know that. But you can have a glass of water that's really polluted so badly you'd die if you drank it. We know that, right? But we sort of know, even without being scientists, that the pollution is not inherent to the water, is it? The pollution can be identified and extracted. Do we accept that? Well, every time you remove a little bit of pollution, there's that much more purity is coming to the surface, isn't it? You don't have to inject pureness into the water. It's already there, but you extract the pollution. Well, that's like with the mind. As you extract attachment and neurosis and ego and stuff, you're purifying, you're enhancing your natural qualities of clarity and love and bliss and joy. Buddha says they are at the core of our being. You can add on to them, you can increase them, you must. But they are who we are. We can never lose those. And that's a surprising point because we think it's almost the other way, you know. And this is Buddha's experience. Why he says we can finally get rid of all the delusions is because they're not at the core of our being. That's his main point. I find this quite shocking and quite encouraging. Do you understand what I'm saying? They're not at the core of our being. They don't define us. But that's a big surprise because I think we all think that they do. We run to the negative stories almost every second when it comes to ourselves. Always finding fault, always thinking we're not good enough, always thinking we're too fat, this, too that. That's the dissatisfaction energy. And it's automatic. It doesn't take too much. I mean, 27 people can tell you you're a nice person. You won't believe a word of it. One person says you're a mean person. You'll believe it 100%. This is really proof what we think already ourselves. You know, it's kind of ironic. It's very surprising. Yeah, Angeliki.
So, Robina, we can say that sadness is a healthy state of mind. Sadness, not depression. Because, I mean, how His Holiness the Dalai Lama would feel for the suffering.
Yes, I see. Well, that's,
bad
I would say they would call that compassion. Using Buddhist ones, that's called empathy with the suffering of another. So a lot with that, you could say sadness comes with compassion, but equally you could say the sadness would also be a feeling of depression. So it's a word that I don't think has any. It's a mixture, I think. Yeah. I mean, the Dalai Lama one time when he was talking about his mother who died, suddenly tears came and he was sad. But you would argue it wasn't because of attachment. He remembered his mother's good qualities. He remembered her kindness. And the next minute he was cracking jokes again, you know. So sadness can be, a depressed person is very sad. So I think you've got to look at the character of the sadness. It might be self-centered or it might be compassion. It could be either, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
Compassion is quite overwhelming, though.
There you go. This is a very interesting discussion. I think we should have a tea break and then we'll go into how, okay, I think now if we can take this view, we've got the bunch of rubbish, neurotic, delusional ones, and we have the marvellous, virtuous ones. Why it's so hard often to do the work of distinguishing them is because, like I'm saying before, they're like a garden mixed with herbs and flowers and weeds, and you don't know botany. You haven't got a clue to distinguish them. And that's why it's so tricky. So we'll discuss more of that, I think. I have a tea break though. And I'll have a voice break. My voice is getting hoarse.